Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I welcome you all to ANDAcademy's Kaleidoscope session. Um, I'm Shubhangi, and I'm part of the branding and communications team at ANDAcademy. Um, for those of you who know a little bit about and for those of you who do not, I would like to still talk about ANDAcademy. ANDAcademy is actually the brainchild of Dr. Jitin Chadda. We are an online design school based in New Delhi, and we actually come from the pedigree of IIAD, which has been imparting design education for over 10 years now. And actually offers professional short courses in the domains of graphic design, interior design, and UI UX design. And these are all courses that are designed for people that are working or enrolled in full-time courses or can only dedicate like some hours during the day to learning. So these are part-time courses that are delivered online. We have one full-time course in graphic design, but most of these courses are part-time. Um, we deliver all of these courses online, as I said. We also, as I mentioned, we come from the pedigree of IIAD, and all of our courses and curriculum are designed by people that are working in the industry and are practicing in the industry. So we get very industry relevant latest knowledge about the design domain and what is happening in the industry, what are trends, what works for recruiters across verticals that are common in the design industry. All of our classes are live and interactive. So imagine a design studio that you would find in a design college in an offline setting. We try and simulate that environment just online. We rely on technology to do that. And all of our classes happen in an interactive format. So this format is more webinar based, where you're sort of in a passive learning mode. Somebody is speaking and then you're sort of listening. That is not the format for our classes. Those are very interactive and live. As I said, our curriculum is designed by people who are in the industry and is also delivered by people that are practicing in the industry. We also focus more on the design principles. Yes, you get to learn the tools, which is your basics, Photoshop and AutoCAD and Figma and SketchUp and whatever is relevant for your domain. But you also get to learn what to do with those tools, how to think like a designer, what will you design with those tools. So we go beyond the learning of just tools or just software. We also focus also on the design fundamentals and design principles and processes that would sort of help you to become like a holistic or a complete designer. Uh, all of our curriculum is also woven with projects that borrow from real world problems or challenges. So when you hit the ground running, you can sort of expect to work on similar projects or similar challenges with similar briefs. Um, these projects also culminate into a portfolio at the end of your course. We also have so much faith in the quality of education that we provide job guarantee on some of our courses, given that you also meet your attendance and effort criteria. We started our journey in 2022. We are already a community of 1,200 plus learners, 50 plus mentors, 200 plus industry connects or hiring partners, and we're rated 4.6 on Google. So if you are wanting to enroll in a design course, you can go and check us out on Google. Um, Now to sort of move to today's session. Kaleidoscope is a series that was conceptualized as inviting design maestros from different fields to sort of talk about their perspective on design. Today, we are joined by Shalini Raghunathan, who's the co-founder of Three Big Things Studio. Shalini is a seasoned design practitioner with 20 plus years of experience at global tech leaders like Autodesk, Salesforce, and Cisco. Her work sits at the intersection of people centered research, design strategy, and storytelling, enabling creative collaboration and driving meaningful business outcomes. As I mentioned, she's the co founder of Three Big Things, a behavioral design studio that partners with organizations to tackle complex business challenges through customer experience innovation and organizational culture transformation. Um, During her time at Autodesk, Shalini contributed to the globally distributed team behind Fusion 360, the company flagship product design and manufacturing tool. She was a featured speaker at Autodesk's annual Global Experience Design Summit in San Francisco and received a special CEO award for her impact. Beyond her design work, Shalini is deeply passionate about Indic mythology, handicrafts, culture, and philosophy. She holds a postgraduate diploma in Indian aesthetics from Gyan Prabha, Mumbai, an influence that informs both her personal worldview and professional ethos. With that, I will hand it over to Shalini. Shalini, please take over.
Okay, the most awkward part of this call is now over. It's a little weird for me to not be able to see all of the other folks that I'm speaking to. So I shall, imagine a whole bunch of faces behind Prachi and Shubhangi's. Thank you for that introduction, Shubhangi. It did take me back quite a bit down memory lane. Yeah, and I feel a little pumped up right now after listening to all of that. It's a good way to start. And welcome to everybody. It's nice to be speaking to a bunch of aspiring designers. I myself was one very long ago. I trained to be an engineer and then discovered design as a career, as a profession, after having written code for a few years. Then I knew that what I wanted to do with life was called design and that you could go and study for it. So I'm very glad for the kind of work that And is doing, allowing or creating space for people who want to explore what it means to be a designer. Today I'm going to be sharing my lens, my view of design through storytelling. It is strongly influenced by my interest in Indic mythology and philosophy, and possibly by other influences in my creative expression. So I do a little bit of theater. I do a little bit of Indian aesthetics, academically oriented studies. But all of that just goes to say that what you're doing, exploring design as a career through a space like And, that it's all encompassing. That's what I feel about a design practice, is that it just allows for you to bring different aspects of your life experience, of your work experience and creative expression into your design practice. So with that, I'll start. I'm going to share my screen and get started. Just let me know when you can see.
All good, Shalini.
All good? Okay, awesome. So yeah, okay. So I'll start with a quote that I find very powerful, and it is a quote by my design teacher, Professor Balram, who is one of the founders of design education in India. He's one of the founder members of National Institute of Design. And in one of the many, many, many books he's written, this is a quote that really gets me reconnected to my purpose as a designer. So it says, design is giving form, rupa, to the formless, arupa. And that's a very tall order if you think about it. Whether you're designing an application or a phone or a lipstick case or an automobile, that's actually what you're doing. You're actually giving form to something that is a thought, an idea in somebody's head. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. It's a very involved process. It's a very frustrating process sometimes, and it is a very fulfilling process at the end of it. So one way of actually transforming this formless into form is through the stories that we connect with as humans. And that's the lens I'm going to take today. The story that I'll start with is the story of Hanuman. You might all be familiar with this one. So the story begins with Hanuman perched atop Mount Mahendra, and he's leaping off the mountain in search of Sita, who is across the ocean in Lanka. And the story begins here because until this point, Hanuman did not have any idea that he had the superpowers that would allow him to do something so audacious. So you see, Hanuman is the son of the wind god and a nymph called Anjana. And when he was born, he was blessed with a lot of superpowers. And because he's the son of the wind, he could expand and contract himself. And because he was a divine child, he was gifted with a lot of boons that various sages and gods and goddesses gave him. And all of this power in a little child made him quite a handful. So he would get into a lot of mischief, disrupt the prayers and the pujas of the sages and the ascetics. Once he even tried to eat the sun. And when he got a little too out of hand, the sages got together and they said, we must put a stop to this. And because he was such an influential child, they couldn't do him any real damage. So they said, we will put a curse on you. And the curse is that you will forget all of your superpowers. You'll forget the existence of your superpowers. They won't go anywhere. They're still within you. You just don't know that you have them. And, that's what made the problem child who would go and gobble up the sun thinking it was a mango more of a normal child with a normal upbringing. And through all of these years, after he'd forgotten what his superpowers were, Hanuman had a fairly normal childhood until the time he met Prince Ram, who was, passing by, and they came to know that he was searching for his wife. And so for this reconnaissance mission, the tribe, Hanuman's tribe, nominated him as one of the people to go south towards Lanka and search for Sita. And it was at this time that one of the elders in the tribe decided that it is time to remind Hanuman of his superpowers, because this is a mission worthy of his superpowers. And of course, he's now older and more mature and knows how to deal with his superpowers. So Jambavan is the elder in the tribe who chants an incantation and reminds Hanuman that these were all the boons and gifts given to you by the deities. These are your superpowers. You have the power to expand and contract yourself. And he sang his praises and said, this is all that you're capable of. And that was enough for Hanuman to remember all of his capacities. And that's when he crushes Mount Mahindra into a crumble and leaps off of the mountain, goes across the ocean. And we'll find out what happens next as the talk moves along, right? So I'm going to leave this literally at a cliffhanger of sorts and move to why I chose this story to begin our session with. So as designers, we are storytellers, and sometimes we forget that we have the superpower, and that can have unintended consequences, because sometimes we either choose the wrong story or forget to tell a story altogether. And one of my favorite examples of how that played out was in the case of this Motophone F3. I'm assuming that most of the people on this call are too young to remember this. It was in the early 2000s sometime that this phone came out. And it was designed for the Indian subcontinent with a lot of thought. I remember Shubhangi mentioning that the design tools that you use are not just the tools themselves, but you also learn why you're using those tools, towards what end. So when this phone was being designed, you had, a bunch of people from Motorola's head office come into India, live here for 6 months, study the conditions. And their goal was to build a phone that would be adopted by the entire population. And they had very strict criteria for it. This was a phone that was under 2,000, 3,000 rupees. It had a battery life of a week. And because it had one of those Kindle e-reader type screens, you could even see the numbers in bright daylight. It had a waterproof number pad. So even if you were sweaty or if it was in the rain, the phone wouldn't get damaged. So it had all of these considerations because it was designed for the so-called lesser privileged population. And would you believe it, this phone sunk without a trace. And there's no surprises there. But the reasons why it sunk without a trace, why it didn't do so well, despite all of the thought that went into designing the so-called perfect phone for the Indian subcontinent, is what we'll talk about, right? One of the reasons that came up once this phone kind of tanked in the market, and there was a lot of analysis, was that it is around the same time that the Motophone F3 was released, was the first color phones started coming into the Indian marketplace. And if you look at the one on the right, it's one of the earliest Sony Ericsson phones. Very, crappy interface, very low resolution, obviously, as you can see. But the color phones actually reminded the target audience of mobile phones of that time of the first arrival of color televisions into their homes. So the transition from black and white to color television was still a very nostalgic memory, a very strong memory for people of the generation where they had to choose between a Motophone F3 and a color phone that was probably relatively cheaper. So what would you choose, right? Would you choose a phone that reminded you of sweat and poverty and power cuts, Or would you choose a phone that reminded you of nostalgia and Bollywood and FM music playing on the phone? I think the choice was quite obvious. And I myself actually owned the phone on the right. I did not choose, a more stable, staid phone that would last me through quote unquote tough times. So what is the story this phone is telling you? Do you really want to hear stories of, dust bowls and poverty and like, oh, you need to kind of have a phone that you can see when you're out in the harsh sunlight? Or would you fall for the charms of a probably much from our perspective, poorly designed phone that actually fulfilled your emotional needs? What are the stories that these people were listening to? And what are the stories that the products that they designed, what were the stories that they were trying to tell? Contrast this with a phone that is far more recent, right? This is, I think, a few years old. It's called the Light phone. And it's a phone that's designed to be used as little as possible. Very similar features to the Motophone F3. It has the same e-reader screen. It has very bare minimal features. You basically protect it. The story that this phone tells you is that we're protecting you from clickbait and media and anxiety-inducing infinite feed. And if you think about it, the comparison to the Motophone and this, very similar. But look at the story they're trying to give you. They're trying to tell you the story of checking out of the attention economy. They're telling you the story of, protesting against surveillance capitalism. And it puts the power back in your hands. So very similar features. It is a phone. It's, of course, in a different context. Today, we are far more overwhelmed with the idea of, social media taking over our lives, AI taking over our lives and all of that. But then this phone seems to be telling you the story of an oasis of peace and still being able to communicate with people who are close to you. In fact, one of the reviews that I read about this phone, it says that in one of the earlier versions of the phone, texting was so difficult that this person would only use the phone very minimally to text one or two words or sentences, and therefore he stopped being part of very involved chat conversations, either on Twitter or anywhere else. Twitter, of course, you can't access on this, but even on messages. And it was just a conscious decision to pick up the phone and have a conversation, right? So what are those choices? What are those stories that as designers you're choosing to tell about the products, the services, the experiences that you're designing? That's the story that we want to talk about. And why? Because the real difference, this is a quote from Yuval Noah Harari's book, the name is just dropping out of my head as we speak. But anyway, the quote is beautiful. It says, the real difference between us and chimpanzees is the mysterious glue that enables millions of humans to cooperate effectively. This mysterious glue is made up of stories, not genes. We cooperate effectively with strangers because we believe in things like gods, nations, money, human rights. Yet, none of these things exists outside the stories that people invent and tell one another. So a story is actually a fundamental act of trust that you and I choose to believe in the same story. If we choose to believe in the same story of, okay, this is a nation, this is how money operates, this is what a bank is, this is what the brand that I'm selling talks about. So if you and I are listening to the same story about the same brand, then we have something to connect over. So this statement actually kind of, for me, stories are the bedrock of what we identify with as humanity, right? Because we believe in the shared stories of the things that we are brought up with, the things that we choose to align ourselves to, the things that we owe allegiance to. And based off of that idea of powerful stories and how we connect to these stories and how we as designers, A, have to remember what these stories are, B, have to remind the people who we are designing about what stories they want to connect to, right? And how does that happen? With that, I'll tell you with another story. So this is the story of Narada. Narada is a celestial sage. He is very adept at singing. He is he's very wise and he's got a lot of skills. But one of the main reasons he's known in the Hindu pantheon is because he sings the praises of Vishnu. And he's got the ability to move through all the 14 worlds, and he can move through space and time. And he's got extraordinary ability to create poetry, write poetry, and all of that. So one day, Narada goes to Vishnu's abode and he says, I want you to declare me as your greatest devotee. Now, this is another story that you might probably be familiar with. But Narada goes in there and he says, he gets it into his head that because I'm so accomplished in being your devotee, I need to be declared your greatest devotee on earth or in the world. And Vishnu says, well, I would do so if it were not for the fact that there is actually my greatest devotee on earth. She's a farmer, and you can go, check out who she is. So obviously Narada is very incensed. He's like, how is it possible that, a mere mortal on earth can be a greater devotee than me? And so he takes Vishnu's leave and goes down to earth to observe this farmer woman, very indignant and incensed, saying, how can this be possible? So he goes to see this woman. She wakes up at the crack of dawn. She says a short prayer to Vishnu. And then it's the morning chores, right? Sending the kids off to school, milking the cows, packing a little bit of food, and then going to the field with her husband, back-breaking work in the hot sun all day. Just before they sit down for lunch, she says the same short prayer again, eats her meal, continues working in the fields. At sunset, she comes back home. It's the same routine all over again, milk the cows, do this, clean up the house, take care of the kids, all of that. And just before sleeping at night, she says the same prayer and goes to sleep. Now Narada is waiting with bated breath. When is this dramatic display of devotion going to happen that's going to prove that she's a greater devotee than me who knows all of these skills? He waits for a week, nothing happens. And he gets completely impatient and he goes back to Vishnu and he says, I was there for a week and I didn't see her do anything except chant your name 3 times a day. And it was just the same prayer over and over again. I know so many more of yours. How can you even say that she's the greater devotee? So Vishnu says, well, I'll explain all of that to you, but there's a very urgent task that I want you to do right now. I want you to take this pot of oil. It's a brimming pot of oil. I want you to place it on the top of your head, and walk around the earth 3 times and come back without spilling a single drop of oil. And this is critical to the well-being of earth and everybody who lives on it. And Narada is like impatient for a response, but he says, okay, fine, because you're saying it, I'll do it. So he goes and completes the task, walks around the earth 3 times without spilling a single drop of oil from the pot, comes back, hands it back to Vishnu and says, look, I've done your task now. Now at least declare me your greatest devotee. Vishnu looks at him and says, when you were doing this task, how many times did you think of my name? And Narada is obviously shut up for good, right? He has no answer. He looks up and he says, well, not even once. And then his indignance kicks in again. He's like, but you only gave me this work. So I'm doing your work. And then Vishnu asks him, well, who do you think gave the farmer woman her job to do? She has 100 things to think of during the day. She's running a house. She's going to the field. She's doing all of this. Still, she manages to think of my name 3 times a day. And with that conversation, he reminds Narada of, the reason why he claims to be the greatest devotee. And I think as designers, for us, the connection to this story is how do we remind ourselves about the people we are designing for? Because it's very easy when you're learning a new skill or, going for a course or attending college, we would all like to be like Narada, right? Just like, immerse ourselves in the experience. I know I've done it after working for a few years. When you go back to study, you just want to learn for the joy of it and not really worry about the consequences. And at other times, you are expected to be like the farmer woman, where you have to have that balance of, whether when you're in a corporate job or you're in a studio job, you have to think about many other constraints. You are like working with the engineering team, you're working with the product managers, you're working with business and sales, and you have so many of these other constraints coming up. You can't just say, oh, all of this is happening. Either I shun all of that and not pay any attention to it, and I'll go and be a Narada who's only focused on my craft and ignoring everything else. That's sometimes just not an option. And how is that making you a better designer? So what are the things that will help you connect back to why you're in design? Why did you join, this profession in the first place? Why did you choose to go to design school? Why did you choose to do a course? What was it about design that first attracted you? That's one thing that you need to stay connected to. And the other thing that you need to stay connected to is who you're designing for. Because at the end of the day, design is a craft, a profession that is directed towards somebody outside of yourself. You're not an artist. You're not designing for self-expression. You're not creating for self-expression. You're designing for creating an experience for somebody else in the way they want it. So what's those little prayers or those little hooks that keep you connected to both of these things? In my experience, and the way we use the things that we use to connect back is the power of ritual. And when we say ritual, we don't mean habit or routine, which is more mindless, which is more enforced in some cases. But ritual is all about doing your action with awareness, with meaning, with intentionality. And these rituals are the stories that help you connect back to people, to purpose, right? What is a ritual? A ritual is a practice that is imbued with symbolic meaning and performed with intentionality and consistently repeated with purpose and passion. And this ritual can be anything. It could be just your weekly sketching ritual that helps you connect back to your creative expression. It could be a weekly ritual of reading one of your favorite design magazines. It could be a weekly ritual of getting together with a bunch of designer friends and doing something that will help you grow as a designer. It could be an activity that you do within your office, probably with people from other functions, get them together and talk about how you can be a better designer, or how they can help their customers better. It could be a talk, a conference, whatever else, right? It could be big or small rituals, but these are the intentional activities that you're saying, I'm doing this so that I can stay connected to my power as a designer. And I am doing this so that I can stay connected to the people I'm designing for. So what are those rituals that you can design for yourself? Because what ritual does is it reconnects you to the people and purpose of your world as a designer. By creating space, we come back to the stories here, by creating space to recall and retell the original stories that you want to keep alive through your career as a designer, right? And I'll share a few rituals that we've followed over the years that help us stay connected to those stories. So the purpose of the story is not just to say, hey, this is entertainment. No, the story is actually something that's connecting you back to your purpose. It's connecting you back to the people that you originally thought you wanted to enter this profession for. So one of the rituals that we follow, and this has been going on for a few years from my time at Cisco and beyond, but even now at Studio 3 Big Things, every Monday morning, we start with an intention setting exercise, which is, what's your intention for the week? This is not a checklist. It's not, I want to, complete this proposal. I want to send out these, close these tickets, whatever. This is what do you want to create for yourself during the week? So it could be, that you want to learn a new skill. It could be that you want to connect more with your teammates this week. It could be that you want to remind yourself, like it says, make edible dosas, not perfect dosas. It could be that, you're starting a new project and you just want to remind yourself that it's okay to make a few mistakes. And the idea is to draw it, not write it. So you will see that they're all drawings for the most part, with a little bit of scribbles to tell you what it is about. And you connect back to these intentions during the week. So it's a little story that reminds you what you wanted during the week when you started off. So maybe you're having a really shitty Wednesday with a terrible client call, or you're having a really packed Thursday where all of your planned tasks went out of the window. But when you look back at the intention you set for the week, it kind of helps you reconnect and hark back to what you wanted for yourself at the beginning of the week. So this is one ritual that we follow without fail. And not only do we do it at the beginning of the week, we always do it at the beginning of a project, at the beginning of a workshop, at the beginning of an event like this. And if we had more time, I would have actually started with an intention setting exercise. There's always next time. So the second ritual that helps us connect back to our stories is this idea of a critique. A design critique is something that brings the design team together over a shared purpose of creating great work. How do you keep honing your skill as a designer? How do you listen and how do you care about the work that your team is producing? It's not just me, going into a black box, creating something, handing it off and waiting for it to go into production. It is about critique is about the ability to offer feedback as a gift. Critique is about the ability to receive that feedback and make your work better. And this is another ritual when it's not like, a standard operating procedure saying, oh, every piece of work that goes out of our stables needs to go through critique. That's not what it is. When you're doing it with awareness and intentionality, saying the purpose of critique is to connect with my fellow designers, and the purpose of my critique is to make sure that I'm always keeping the customer who I'm designing for front and center for every piece of work. So if you see here, you'll see that there are slots: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 1 hour every day would be set aside for the team to do design work, critiqued. And therefore, over a period of time, it became inherent to the team to tell the stories about the work. So one of the things that critique does is to make you take a step back from just the design itself and say, what are the stories behind it? Why did I choose to make this decision? What were the constraints of the project? What was it that happened in the history of this project that made me, make a certain choice? Have I done enough research and brought in those insights into the choices that I'm making? All of those stories come up to the forefront when you're doing critique. And when critique becomes a ritual that is inherent to your practice, to your design practice, you will see just over the course of a few weeks that the quality of your design work just improves exponentially, right? So that's the second ritual that helps you connect to people and purpose. And the third ritual that helps you connect to people and purpose is, again, something that we follow at Three Big Things, is the acknowledgement ritual. So at the end of every milestone, whether it's a project that we've closed, whether it's a workshop that's within a project that we're running, there's always an acknowledgement exercise. And what that does is just very simple. It is each person going around the table and saying, I acknowledge you for. That's it. No frills. The other person is just supposed to quietly accept that. No, hey, but you know what, you also did it. Oh, thank you, but I didn't do so much. None of all of that. It's just in silence. We all sit together and say, I acknowledge you for, taking that little extra time to complete those visuals, because the deck looked so much better and connected so much better with the audience because of that. Or I really acknowledge you for so seamlessly handling that one bit of the workshop where we thought things were going to go out of control, but you brought it back on track. Things that you tend to miss, like Narada, when you're kind of walking around the earth with a pot of oil on your head, you tend to miss these things, right? What brings you back and tells you that, hey, I really need to acknowledge the people who I work with for what they help me do as a designer, how they help me be a better designer, how they help me deliver better design to people I'm designing for. And at Three Big Things, we have, good people, good work, good money as the tenets of the kind of projects we pick. And this really helps us connect to good people and good work as a ritual. So I'm feeling a little weird, looking at my own picture for so long. So I'm going to just quickly move on to the next one. But that's the story of how ritual helps you connect to the stories that really give you that meaning and that grounding. I'll come back to another really powerful quote. It says, this is a poet's quote, and that's why it's so beautiful. It says, the universe is made of stories, not atoms. And just to kind of balance out that poetry, we have Don Norman, another big guru of design, who says, why stories? Because they combine history and context, critical events and results, both good and bad, expected and unexpected, all linked through causal explanations. Stories emphasize that life is an interconnected system. And that is why the universe is made up of stories and not of atoms. And so going back to the kind of stories we want to tell as designers about the universe we are creating, because remember, as designers, we are giving form to the formless. We are actually creating a universe that we want people to buy into. And for that, I'll take a few stories and examples from our, modern day-to-day life. You have this I'm just looking at the comment. Yes, the book name is Homo Sapiens, correct. Okay, so let's go back to this story about Paytm, right? Everybody recognizes this sound box, I'm sure. It's a beautifully designed interface. If you think about it, there's a shopkeeper who's kind of surrounded by people who are asking for a bill for this, a payment for that, payment ho gaya kya, ye wo. And of course, there are little unscrupulous people who show a screenshot when they've not actually paid. All of that's happening. And here comes the magical sound box that solves all of those issues. Whether you're a thela wala selling coconut water, or you're in a college canteen in an IIT campus, or you're just the local grocery shop guy. And it's a beautiful solution because it actually, in context, solves for the stories that you've heard as a designer saying, these are the problems I'm having. I want to not have to use visual feedback to say that this transaction is complete. What can I do? I'm semi-literate. What can I do? And here it is. But you take the same solution and put it in the context of a different story, and you have a completely different result. So the magical solution of having an audio feedback when a payment is complete also works in this point of sale device. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is not very long ago, we had gone out for dinner as a family, extended family. People had come in from abroad, and so there was this whole table full of families sitting down for dinner. And after dinner, there's this little quiet period where everybody is just sitting and chatting, and suddenly the waiter comes in and he offers this POS device to me for making the payment. I pull out my card and I make a payment. And then this device loudly announces payment of X received for blah, blah, blah. And you can imagine after dinner when everybody is experiencing a priceless moment, you have this device coming and announcing the cost of that dinner. Such a jarring contrast. So this is what I mean when I say, when you're thinking of designing something, when you're thinking of what are the stories that people are going to experience when what you design is actually in their lives. This is one example of how something that's so innocuous and so very useful and the star of the show in one place actually ends up being the villain of the show in another place. So the unintended consequences of what you design is something that you have to look out for. Think of the longer stories of the things that you design. I'll quickly go through the rest. I'm seeing that we are kind of out of time, so I'll go through the rest really quickly. This is one of my favorite stories because it's a positive example. So I'm sure you've all heard of the Michelin star. The story of how it first came about is that the French brothers who started the Michelin tire company used to give out this little book that says, here's a map. Here's where you can get your tires replaced. Here's where you can get your fuel refilled. And those kind of functional inputs were there in this little book that the Michelin brothers had kind of put out. And it was a free book, right? It was just handed out to everybody. And this is way back in the late 1800s, I think, early 1900s. And the idea was to help people relate better with their automobile and relate better with the tires that these people were interested in selling more of. But it so happened that one of the brothers ended up going into a workshop and seeing that this book was used to prop up the frame on which the car was and stuff like that. It was not actually used for the content inside it. And so they started thinking about what would make it more meaningful for people. And that's when they started reviewing restaurants in the book. And when they reviewed restaurants, they said they gave it stars. The first 1 star meant that it was a good restaurant worth a stop. 2 stars meant that it was worth a detour. And 3 stars meant that it had exceptional cuisine and it was worth a separate special journey. Now, if you think about it, what they were also trying to do was to sell more tires. Because if you drove longer distances, your tires would get bald quicker and you would buy more tires. But that's not the story they're selling. They're selling a story that is meaningful to the person who has a car and wants to go out as a family to have a good meal. And this was way before it was the early days of the automobile, right? You're actually creating a story that people want to belong to that did not exist before. So that's the power of a good story. And today, of course, that, Michelin has these secret, restaurant reviewers who go into restaurants like spies and then give them ratings and stuff like that. So now to be awarded a star, a restaurant has to go through a lot of circus. But the origin story of this, again, it's come a long way. The origin story of this is just how do we make people enjoy the experience of driving and what stories do people want to be a part of? And that is what actually was the turning point for the Michelin book. I'm going to skip. Do we have time, Prachi? Should I skip? Okay, cool. So I wanted to watch this.
Go on.
Okay, cool. I'm going to start sharing again because this needs audio. And I forgot to turn that bit on. So just want you to look at the story.
When I first moved to Cambodia, I lived in a rural village, and it took a little bit of time before people got used to this sort of foreigner wandering around. Initially, I was here to search for a remedy to a problem: anemia, caused by a lack of iron in the blood. It causes dizziness and weakness. It breeds complacency and lethargy. Kids can't concentrate in school. It also causes premature births and problems during pregnancy for women. Nearly 2 out of 3 children are anemic. But this piece of metal has the power to stop it all. My challenge was to find a way to supplement the typical Cambodian diet of fish and rice. I knew that iron pills and other iron treatments weren't really affordable by many people in the villages. In my search, I found that cooking in a cast iron pot can release iron into the food, and that iron is then absorbed in the diet. But I realized that most Cambodian women use aluminum pots because they're cheaper and lighter. And then I got to thinking, what if I could get them to put this chunk of iron in their pot? It would be a simple, cheap, and accessible treatment that even the remote villagers could use. But my simple solution had one big problem. I found that the women were hesitant to add this sort of ugly piece of iron into their pots. I found that the iron blocks came in very useful, but just not in the pots. And so I realized I had to dig a little bit deeper. I searched for everything. I looked at sayings and beliefs, I looked at rituals, anything that would give me a better understanding of Cambodian culture. And then I landed this, a symbol of good luck. I think I was a little bit shocked when I found out how positive the findings were. In the test areas, anemia has pretty much disappeared altogether, which is absolutely astounding. It was far exceeded what we had expected. We're hoping that this little fish holds the key to treating anemia across the region and beyond. It's definitely one lucky fish.
So again, somebody says this announcer is a little annoying.
They're
No,
just
that
talking
was
about
that.
yeah,
When you were
not the
talking about the
sound box.
Paytm.
Yeah.
The announcer. Okay, the Paytm announcer. Okay. We're talking about the voiceover on this video, and
No, it was at that time. So this is also a good example of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get it, Saurav. I didn't look at the timestamp. I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, just look at the power of this story, right? Like, are you trying to sell people the story of, hey, I want to cure your anemia? Or are you trying to sell people the story of bring good luck into your life through the lucky iron fish, which will incidentally also cure your anemia? And it's kind of a humbling experience for a designer to have somebody not accept what you think is a fantastic solution, whether it's the Moto phone, or the Paytm soundbox or this. When you go in there and you say, okay, I think this is going to solve all your problems, but if your story and my story don't match, no luck. And that's why you need the lucky iron fish. So, one second, this is. So, with all of those stories about stories, we come back to does anybody still remember the cliffhanger story that we have still left behind? What happened to Hanuman when he jumped across the ocean? I'm just going to bring it all back here, right? Hanuman jumped across the ocean. Along the way, he had a lot of challenges. There was a mountain that came in his way. There was a big serpent that tried to eat him. He had all of these sea monsters to fight. And then finally, he reached Lanka. He had to search all over the island for Sita. He found her. He gave her the ring that Ram had given him to say, this is what will help you identify yourself as my messenger. And unfortunately, he got caught by Ravana's henchmen and they set his tail on fire. And he, after successfully completing his mission of telling Sita not to worry, Ram is on his way to kind of rescue you and all of that, he ends up having his tail set on fire, and he still has to complete his recon mission, find out how to attack Lanka and all of that. And also he ends up setting fire to the whole city. Now, all of these adventures have happened. He puts his tail's fire out in the ocean and then jumps back across the ocean. He jumps back across the ocean, back to Rama. Now, the story that he tells Rama about his expedition is a very powerful story. And I love it because it's only 2 words. So in the original Valmiki Ramayana, he goes back to Rama and he says, Drishta Sita, found Sita. And because Hanuman is known for his empathy and his communication skills and his great wisdom, there's a commentary on why he says Drishta Sita and not Sita, Drishta, or any other combination of words. He says found Sita first, because if he had said Sita found, the little pause after Sita would have caused so much anxiety for Ram, who's waiting with bated breath for news of his wife, that he would have just dropped dead in that spot, just from the shock or the anticipation of finding out the news. So Hanuman, in his empathy and his wisdom, chose to say found Sita, to give that information first upfront and say, all is well, found, it's all good, Sita. And that is the power of storytelling, with just 2 words. Of course, there is time for him to give Ram all of the other information, saying, oh, when you cross the ocean, you'll come across all of these monsters. And, I set Lanka on fire and I saw Sita and, I gave her the ring and then she gave me back this Chudamani. All these stories are going to go on. But the most important story is the one that he shared with all of his empathy and wisdom. And he says, found Sita. And with that, I want to end by saying, as designers, may we always remember that storytelling is our secret superpower. May we harness the power of ritual to connect to people in purpose through our stories. And may we always share our stories with empathy and wisdom.
Thank you, Shalini. I'll let Shubhangi take over.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, Shalini. I can safely say that I am so enamored, and if that is the right word, I'm so happy to have been part of this session. But yeah, the floor is open for the questions. If I may request you to use the Q&A box to put in your question, and so that we can sort of answer it systematically. Okay, so the questions have started pouring in. Somebody is asking, can you please suggest some books that we can read?
Okay, books that we can read. I definitely like Homo Sapiens. I like Thinking Design by Professor Balram. That's a beautiful book with it's just got timeless, stories, timeless advice for a designer practicing at any time. There's a book called Circle of the Nine Muses that again talks about storytelling with the hero's journey and with that take on it. What else? Oh, I love Design the Life You Love by Aise Bursul. So these are all not stories about storytelling per se. They're not design books about storytelling per se, but they are the inspirations that kind of talk to you. And I love Devdutt's work. I think it's again super it's been a great influence on me in connecting design practice and mythology, because it's a lot about the social commentary as well. And then you see how mythology and stories actually influence mental models and frameworks and the way people think and all of that.
Thank you so much for that. If I may so suggest one book myself, I am a big fan of Italo Calvino's Cosmic Comics, which because you've already spoken about the universe and particles and all of that, and how like beautifully he sort of writes about the particles in the universe, and then sort of weaves the story about like one particle also getting attracted to another one. So yeah, that's a brilliant book as well.
Love that. There's also Bill Bryson. So he talks about a brief history of nearly everything. I think that's a lovely book from a, you know, design standpoint. Not so much, but actually that too. You know, it just tells you a lot about uh, how you look at the designed world or the man-made world differently. And there's a great podcast called 99% Invisible. I don't know if any of you've heard of it. That's a great podcast when it comes to talking about the man-made world. There's also this BBC World Service has 50 things that made the modern economy, and I think 40 animals that I forgot. They're both like, you know, adjacent. If you find one, you'll find the other. It talks about biomimicry. So how design is influenced by nature. So that's another one. And that's it. I think this will keep you busy for a couple of weeks.
Right. Um, so okay. So this is, I feel like this is a subset of the question that you've already answered. Sarvanan is asking any books or website for reference for design and storytelling. So I think you've already answered the books part. Do you also look at websites?
No more podcasts than websites. I think there's nothing off the top of my head. I just like, I think Devdutt's site, and this is what's coming off the top of my head. But maybe I'll look at my pocket and let you know. Like
Sure.
it's shutting down. I'm so sad about it. I don't know if you use it, but yeah. Anyway,
Vaishnavi is asking, how do you identify a story that ignites the first ember of your creativity?
how do I recognize a story that? Oh, that's such a like damdar question, Vaishnavi. Close to 8 p.m. in the evening. How am I going to answer that? You know, I think it's not really like one story that will ignite the ember of my creativity. As a designer, as a practitioner, you're always looking out for stories. So it's just that your story radar is always on because you're connecting with human beings like at every level. You're always looking for ways to be empathetic and ways to kind of connect your solution to what unmet need somebody has. And that radar is always on. And it basically is, you know, anything that represents the human condition is what I would say. And it's not just one story that will spark creativity. It is that you have a bank of stories and you connect to a different story depending on what you're trying to solve for. So it's about just, you know, keeping that fountain of stories filled to the brim all the time, because you will keep dipping into that over and over again as you go through your practice. It's not about just one story that will suddenly spark creativity. You just keep all of them in your head and, you know, plug into the one that matters most at that time.
Right. Somebody is asking, how do you get good at storytelling?
Tell a lot of stories. Tell a lot of stories, listen to a lot of stories. There's this place in Bangalore called Kathalaya that teaches storytelling. You can do online courses, but yeah, just tell a lot of stories. Collect stories first and practice telling them in different ways. You know, the narrative arc, the same story can be told in many different ways. And unless you actually, it's like, you know, cycling. You just have to keep doing it. And once you do it, you'll not forget it.
Deepak is asking what defines as good work. Because I feel storytelling narrative, like the lucky fish, is tacky as it could also be exploited for business. How to differentiate narrative building and manipulation?
You know, I think design is a very confronting profession and practice. Uh, it might be true for other professions as well. I only know one other thing that I've done, which is to write code. You can write code to set off a bomb. You can write code to save somebody's life. You can write code to, make that Paytm box yell at the most inopportune moments. But it is actually, I think it's a blessing that design makes you ask that question about every choice that you make as a practitioner. Do you really want to sell that junk food? Do you really want to optimize for clickbait? Do you really want people to spend that much more time? Like Netflix says, our main competitors sleep. So I think that answer is not like a blanket answer, but I feel blessed that design is a profession that allows you to be present to that question every decision you make.
Right.
Sorry, Shubhangi, I'm going to just step in here, Shalini. It's, I've been thinking about this more. I mean, I've been thinking about it for a long time, but more in the last 3-4 days. I was running a system thinkings workshop in a sort of a social development setup. And what you just said, as like ethics have to be now taught and spoken about, and that is the conundrum, or that's the, I would like to say, that's the ugliness of the world today, because when I read that question, I was like, it is just that. And it's unfortunate that we have to even speak about ethics. So yeah, and maybe develop an internal compass. I don't even want to say develop an internal moral compass or whatever, just a compass.
Yeah. I think just the fact that you're always questioning, and this profession demands that you're always questioning, is in a sense, the a little bit of a shortcut that you have. Like you say, maybe it is sad that we have to have ethics as a course of study, but I would definitely say that my ethics as a design practitioner have been very strongly influenced by thinking design and by the tutelage of Professor Balram and others of his uh, generation who have kind of practiced a very different uh, style or depth of design, I would say.
But it was never formally taught.
No, we didn't.
It just, we were discussing another day on this, that how values are not taught but caught.
Yeah. In fact, as a part of Three Big Things Studio, we do several projects about how do you get an organization to live its values. It's not, values are not just posters that you put up on the wall. Ki canteen mein bada bada poster laga diya. That's not what we're talking about. But what does it mean in behavior design? Like, how do you get people to behave in a way that is coherent with the values that the organization declares itself to be? And while I would say that it could happen naturally, it should happen naturally, I think it's also the inherent entropy of the world that makes you dissipate, and hence stories and hence ritual, because it brings you back. You may not remember like an ethics course that you did, but there's a story in your head that your childhood your grandmother taught you, or something that you use as a compass to say, this is my true north. And like Narada, sometimes you tend to forget it, but then it is up to you to design those structures in your life that will always remind you why you're doing what you're doing. So
actually, that's probably at the core of the mythology, which has got confused with religion. And how you also spoke about ritual and routine, and mindlessly following a ritual, or sensitively, purposefully, mindfully following a ritual, and defining your ritual with the purpose. So it's all, like how the biggest lessons that I recognize today in my life, I know that they came out of stories. They came out of stories which were just told to you, and at that time you didn't know what you were catching. So that is, of course, the power of storytelling. But like you rightly said, that and I mean, Alfred Nobel created the dynamite for. I mean, that's the most popular story about what he created it for and what it ended up being used for, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to close with this. One of the things that we ask our students to constantly do during their design process is answer this: why I did what I did. And they call it vidvid. So
Yeah.
why I did what I did. And I know that a lot of times, because this is a short course and it's a lot of times it is to do with principles and technical aspects. But you can take this question also to, because I can see a whole lot of our current students and our alumni also in the attendee list. So I'm just connecting it to a term, to a phrase that's familiar for them, that if you can do why I'm doing this, why am I taking this project? Should I take this project? Maybe that question will get answered.
Even when you're in the project, which is why I'm a big proponent of design critique as a, it's a core practice. Like you say, what connects you to quote unquote ethics, or your compass, is your community of designers. So when you practice critique with your community of designers, it brings to the forefront all of those stories that you want to stay connected to. So design critique makes you think about every decision, saying why I did what I did, and present it in a way, in a non-judgmental space where you are allowed more inquiry about it. Not, you're not justifying why I did what I did, but in a critique, you're actually allowing yourself the space to inquire into more of why I did what I did within a community of designers who are trained to think the same way. And that's my for me, critique is like an irreplaceable part of design practice.
Yeah, but unfortunately in India, and because I'm connected to the education system, Shalini, I've seen that critique is often confused with criticism and evaluation and judgment. And also, I mean, I'm sure it's been part of your growing up as a designer. How the word jury was always part of it, and like, I have to, so many times I've worked so hard at trying to eliminate that word from the universe of but it keeps creeping back in because it has just become a ritual to
Yeah,
use the word even when the spirit is not that.
absolutely.
So yeah, critique, I wish we could just embrace critique, you know uh,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a framework that I use for critique, and I'm happy to share it with you. I run it as a workshop where it's like talking about. You might have seen it on the slide, but basically it says the creators, the collaborators, and the critiquers. Like what do those people want to do, and how do they want to move the work forward? And you're right. There's a lot of baggage just with the word itself, and breaking past it, getting past it. There,
yeah,
but the good news is that there is a method. There's a successful
yeah.
method. Teams that I worked with continued the practice of critique way after I'd quit them and stuff like that. And I really think of it as a bedrock of design practice.
Absolutely. No, and we'll get you only to do do the workshop.
That was,
And we'll
that was not a plug. That was me being in violent agreement with,
no, I know that. I know that. I know exactly what the spirit of your response was. But I'm also, sort of plugging this in. I have the ritual of saying a few things so that it becomes a commitment for me
Yes,
for tomorrow.
absolutely.
It's like throwing a thought and a commitment into the universe so that and not just keep it within you. So, anyways, let's get back to some of the questions. I know we've overshot our time. We'll probably keep it within 10 minutes, Shubhangi.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So if you feel free, Shubhangi, to club questions or skip a question if you think it's repetitive. Let's try and wrap it up in another 10 minutes.
Sure. So Gopinath is asking, can you name 5 or 3 influencers who connect customers and client problem statement solutions via design storytelling?
Can you repeat that? Sorry, I was reading somebody else's question. And
Can you name 5 or 3 influencers who connect customers and clients problem statement solutions via design storytelling?
Okay, this is definitely a plug, but I think my co-founder Param does a great job of that. If you follow his posts on LinkedIn, uh, I honestly don't have the patience to write the way he does, but there's a lot of, like a simple story that he'll share, that I think he's shared in the past is when you do research, like fundamental primary research, go and talk to the users that you're designing for. I don't know about influencers per se. I'm not able to. And if Param finds out I called him an influencer, I think he'll be mighty offended. But to answer your question, I think let me go back to the story, right? So when you do primary research, you actually come across these stories yourself. So one of the stories that we came across was, in India, people don't change three things: their barber, their jeweler, and their chemist. And that's a story that you can only get if you're down in the weeds doing your uh, rolling up your sleeves and doing your research yourself. That being said, another like company that we admire greatly at Three Big Things is 1001 Stories, led by Prakash Sharma and Reshma Tonse. Magical people. I mean, they just like have, again, beautiful stories, again from primary research, traveling the length and breadth of the country, coming up with such lovely stories that are rooted in culture and rooted in a very strong, robust behavioral science practice.
And Prakash tells them beautifully.
Prakash is such
a natural at it.
way of storytelling, and Reshma is like a very brilliant mind. And then we have let me think. Jan Chipchase, another researcher. He's one of the earliest ethnographers. Okay, again, very brilliant. You should read his blogs, and he is the father of modern ethnography for design per se, I would say. Again, a brilliant storyteller. I think that's enough. 3 people.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, cool. Moving on, somebody is asking, how do you build your creative thinking skills on a daily basis?
Choose a ritual and keep doing it over and over and over and over and over again. It could be something really simple like intention setting every morning. It could be, I choose to read for 20 minutes. I choose to meditate for 5 minutes. It could be, I choose to go for a walk in Lal Bagh once in a week. Whatever it is, just choose one thing that represents creative fulfillment for you and keep doing it with intention, with passion, with purpose. That's just the power of ritual. You can actually accomplish anything with that.
Moving on, Vaishnavi is asking, when it comes to designing identities for a brand, they have a story behind the brand inception. How do you use that framework while also sort of adding and editing to create a visually unique story?
Yeah, that's a very technical question. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that because graphic design, visual design is not my forte per se. But if you're just talking about the principle of converting a narrative into visual elements, I would say just go back to the basics, go back to first principles. When you're choosing an element, make sure it's not because it looks beautiful to you, but it actually resonates with the person you're designing for, with the person who's going to consume that. So you might be, I'm just exaggerating to make a point, but you might be interested in anime, for example, but that doesn't mean you use that exploration just because it's different and nobody's done it before, but rather use something that have an insight about the audience you're designing for, and there you'll find answers for your creative inspiration. Again, like as a practitioner, I always fall back on primary research. So the deeper you know your users, the better confidence you have that the story you're telling and the design choices you're making will resonate with the people you're designing for. But Prachi and Shubhangi, please add if there's something more technical that you guys follow when you do.
Actually, I'm also following a lot of these questions, Shalini. You're answering them pretty well. I think it's at the end of it, design is practice. You just have to keep doing it and discovering your method on the way, So I can see a whole lot of questions. I'm wondering if there are the subtext is to try and find a shorter way. Can I do it quickly? How do I get better at it quickly? You don't. You just keep practicing and staying a learner forever and find this answer yourself within you in your journey than asking somebody else.
I think when I was in architecture school, our professors made sure that they said this once a day, which is that design is a way of life. It's something that you live, it's something that you do day in and day out, and that's how you sort of become better at it
Yeah.
by doing and living it.
Which is why I recommended the books, right? Design the life you love, and
Yeah.
again, design your life is also another one. But it is that design is sadhana. You just have to keep doing it.
Actually, every any profession that you choose, it is sadhana. I mean, Shalini knows design, I know design, so we can speak about design. We don't know, we've not experienced another profession in
You're a
this life.
surgeon, that's your sadhana, right?
Yeah, so whatever. I'm pretty sure that if there is somebody who's an engineer, for him, engineering is sadhana. To get, and if you accept it as sadhana, then you'll be good at it. So
That's
do and be, do and be, do be. Okay, Shalini, I'm going to, Shubhangi will wrap this up with you with the last two questions. I'm going to take your leave. I have another session to jump into, but it has been lovely, and I'll get in touch with you over that workshop thing. By the way, I was also part of the session when you and Param, I think, had launched the ritual framework.
I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah,
Yeah, Shiva
very
had shared the link, and I thought I'll make that mention at that time.
thank
So sometimes we are part of each other's stories without knowing.
yes. Thank you for that beautiful connection. Ritual's very close to our heart, and it was the launch of Three Big Things. So I'm very happy that you're a part of it.
And
Thank you.
Shubhangi might remember that I had I had mentioned that at that time, but it took Shubhangi and the team some some time to realize what I was talking about. But life comes completes its circles in its own time. So yeah, but it was lovely, Shalini and Shubhangi. Please carry on and wrap up the session.
That's
Uh,
another topic, of
yeah,
course.
wonderful. Bye bye. Thank
Really
you.
lovely meeting you. Thank you for staying, and we'll
Yeah,
catch.
yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Moving on. Somebody's asking, the other day I was walking past a gym and I heard them playing one song, which is Tum Hi Ho, and I immediately went into marketing mode, thinking this is a great idea since it's making the gym goers emotional and it's a good way to get them addicted to the gym. But how do I also start seeing stories in situations since I always tend to think of a strategy more often?
Okay. I think again the practice part of it is, as designers we tend to think of solutions very often, and it requires a lot of unlearning to say what's the unmet need, what's the latent need. It's not about, hey, let's just jump to the solution. I think this is a great solution. Rather, as a designer, you train yourself to think about what is the unmet need that somebody is experiencing in that situation, and not the solution. Because solutions are a dime a dozen, and they are worth nothing if they don't resonate with the person you're designing for. So, why did you think that getting somebody addicted to the gym by playing music is a good idea? It is because there's some unmet need over there that people are finding it difficult to fall off, to kind of get back on the wagon once they fall off, or it's difficult to get up in the morning, commit to going to the gym. So there are many ways of solving that problem. Now, playing good music is only one way, and as a designer you have to train yourself to find that unmet need and ideate on a million ways to solve for that unmet need, and then prototype all of those ideas that you have, and then find the one that resonates best with the people that you're designing for. So the practice is to unlearn saying, hey, I think solution first. No, you think need first, and you're humble enough to prototype whatever ideas you have, take it back to the people you're designing for, and then use that feedback to build that idea. Because there are a million reasons why playing music in the gym might fail as well, and it's up to you to think of the long term impact of the choices you're making as a designer.
Right. Moving on, somebody's asking, I think we've sort of answered this question. This is also a bit technical, but how to get started on your design journey and get better at in terms of design thinking, basically which colors go together well and so on.
I still don't know which colors go well together. Okay, but even if you're colorblind, you can be a really good designer. That's another thing. The I think, I think Prachi answered that very well, is to just practice over and over and over and over again, and be comfortable with making a few mistakes along the way.
Right.
I think humility is a great part of design.
Deepak is asking, will there be an unlearning of rituals? What growth means to three big things?
They're two very separate questions. Will there be an unlearning of rituals? I didn't understand that. And what does growth mean to three big things? I think it's good people, good work, good money. That's about it.
Aparna is asking, my question is sometimes I get distracted by other design tasks while I'm working on something else. How do I tame this urge?
Yeah, the opposite of the Narada problem. Well, just inquire into why you're getting distracted and design for it. You're a designer. You can design your own workflow, your task flow, right? Like, what is the reason? Just stay and observe. I think observation is like one of the most essential designer superpowers. So when you take a pause and observe what's happening, then you can design. So that's what behavior design is about, right? Behavior design is about designing for the way people behave, or understanding why people behave a certain way and designing a way to change that behavior. So I don't know why you're getting distracted, but my solution is just inquire into that, and then maybe remove something in your environment that's causing the distraction. Maybe work from a different place, maybe work at a different time, maybe play some music.
Right. So okay, cool. I think we've answered all of our audience's question. I like to usually close the session with one question that I personally love, asking all of our speakers and all of our learners also, because I get like such interesting answers and it gives me great insight into their brain and I love it, which is basically if you were to redesign something which is as small as like a safety pin or as big as the Delhi Metro rail system, what would you redesign?
Oh my God. What would I redesign? Well, one of the things that I have, you reminded me of a pet project of mine that's kind of fallen by the wayside. So thank you for that. I speak Tamil at home, and I'm hardcore South Indian that way, and we drink a lot of filter coffee. And the coffee filter, the South Indian coffee filter, is like a thing that has been the same way for ages, and it has a lot of problems. When you pour hot water, the top becomes hot. You don't know what kind of decoction you're going to get. It kind of topples over sometimes, all of that. But the South Indian filter coffee has so many stories associated with it that I think that device, in fact, I actually uh, did start a project to redesign the South Indian coffee filter, and I have a few prototypes for it. And you reminded me that I have to dig up those prototypes and try and get it into production. So thank you for that. I think, yeah, that's one thing I would definitely redesign, because it's so rich in stories, and it can be such a beautiful piece. I mean, it is beautiful in its own way right now, but as a designer, there are so many things about its usability and ergonomics that really get to me. And the fact that there's so many Indian crafts that you can incorporate into an everyday utensil like that. I'll end with one of the principles that we follow at Three Big Things is inspired by the Vastu Shastras, that any man-made object, whether it's a road, a bridge, a building, a tool, a utensil, has to have three qualities: Bhogadyam, which is utility; Sukhadarshanam, which is harmony with its environment; and Ramyam, which means to create a sense of well-being. So any designed object or experience or service has to have these three qualities: utility, harmony with its environment, and creating a sense of well-being. And I would love to create a coffee filter that does all those three things.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much, Shalini. Thank you for doing this with us. I thoroughly enjoyed this session. I will go back and watch the recording again. Um, thank you everyone who's just like stuck around till the end of this session. I hope you had a great time and you really enjoyed the session as much as I did. Yeah, with that, I say good night and bye bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for thinking of me, Shibangi. Bye bye.